And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this morning, Sherry Thomas. Sherry is an acclaimed romance author, and her books regularly receive starred reviews from trade publications and are frequently found on the Best of the Year list. She is also a two-time winner of RWA's prestigious Reader Award. Please join me in welcoming Sherry Thomas.
Thank you so much, RWA. A few weeks ago, I said to my husband, I knew what I wanted to wear to my speech, except I thought I was speaking at lunch. But now I found out it's breakfast, and I'm not so sure. And he said, just wear the exact same thing. So here I am at breakfast in my lunch dress. I would like to thank my husband for his good advice and for his kindness and unflagging support all these years. I wouldn't be here without you, sweetheart. I would also like to thank my friend Tracy Wolf, who drove all the way across town at the crack of dawn to do my makeup. Because we can't have me standing here looking like my normal self. And speaking of being here, sometime in the fall of 2015, I checked my phone and found a voicemail. A woman identified herself as RWA President Diane Kelly, and she invited me to speak on Saturday. Those were her exact words. We would like you to come and speak to us on Saturday. So I thought, oh, they must be having a board meeting in town. They know I'm living here, and they want a little light entertainment. So I called her back to say that, of course, I'll drive downtown on Saturday. I'll basically go anywhere when there's some hope that I will get fed. And she told me that, no, the invitation was actually for RWA National. Now, I am the kind of person that as soon as I step into the shower, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, I begin to compose. I begin to practice my Oscar acceptance speech for Best Original Screenplay. And I say the reasons are not entirely clear because I have never written a screenplay, nor do I have plans to do so in the near future. So you would think, given that kind of megalomaniacal bent of mind, when I understood what Diane was actually calling to say, I would have said, yeah, about time. But instead, I was completely stunned, as in the, are you sure you got the right person kind of stunned. In the end, I said yes, because it seemed inconceivable to turn down this kind of honor, even though I felt and feel far short of the stature required to accept it. In fact, this morning, I was in the business office frantically trying to print out my speech. So I was staring at the computer, and a couple of ladies walked by outside in the hall, and one of them said to the other, do you know who Sherry Thomas is? And the other said, I vaguely heard that name before, but I'm really not sure. But you know, since I did say yes, I had to write a speech. 2 days after Diane called me, I had lunch with my friends. As soon as I told them the news, one of them said, with great authority, oh, Thursday's speaker is supposed to make people cry. Saturday's speaker's job is to kick everybody's ass. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how you feel about your getting your ass kicked. But But I am just so very glad that the inimitable Beverly Jenkins already did such a great job kicking our collective ass on Thursday. Because I am, one, temperamentally disinclined to tell people what to do, and two, I kind of love it when writers misbehave. And I don't want you to ever stop. So at that point in the lunch, another one of our friends arrived. When she learned that I needed to give a speech, she said, "Oh, you have to tell them about your hardscrabble immigrant experience." I almost choked on my water when she said that. The way I look at it, I have never known a single day of hardship in my entire life. If I decided to describe any portion of my life as hardscrabble, every dictionary I pass from here on out will leap off its shelf, slap me upside the head for gross misuse of adjectives. But then I thought, wait a minute, I suppose some portion of my life back then could be described as objectively hardscrabble. When I arrived in the United States at age 13, my mom made $700 a month, and she had to support both me and my grandfather on that, which meant that I qualified for free lunch at school, which meant, now that I think about it, that I was personally on welfare to the tune of about $5 a week. Mom's low income at that time was due to her being a grad student living on her assistantship. It was really tough time for her. She studied, she worked, she cooked every single night, and she was always worried because she couldn't afford health insurance for her family. Now, we didn't subsist at the poverty line for a very long time. Once she graduated and started working, we were okay financially. But her income actually didn't make much difference to me. I didn't know enough about life to worry when she had no money, and I wasn't clever enough to get a proper allowance out of her when she was better off. In other words, I was your typical self-centered, insufferable teenager. Except as a teenager, I never would have told anybody to go F themselves because I didn't know enough English for it. I landed in the United States with a vocabulary of about 200 words. And let me tell you, those 200 words were some of the toughest mother bleepers I ever had to deal with. It's like this. When I was still in China, in 5th grade, a rather communist thing happened to me. A PE teacher noticed that I was a decent jumper. So the school decided, over my grandmother's objection, that I was now an athlete, which meant I had to show up at practice both before and after school. My grandmother was very unhappy about that. Part of it was because, like most Chinese elders, she worried that such frivolous activities would hurt my academics. But more importantly, it was because she decided she would start teaching me English herself. And my time commitment to the track and field team meant that I didn't have much free time. Grandma's solution to my time crunch was to tell me that I had to get up at 4:45 in the morning in order to get in an hour of English tutoring before I left for the 6 a.m. workout if I wanted to be on the track and field team. I didn't want to be on the track and field team. But you didn't say no to your principal. Not like that in China in the 1980s. You would think my grandmother, who lived under communism for much longer than I did, would understand it. But guess who got up at 4:45 in the morning for the next 2 years? I am not sure which one I hated more, the daily grind of physical workouts or the daily mental torture of learning English under my grandmother. Seriously, of all the people alive in 1986, I'm not sure anyone wanted to learn English less than I did. I was so not interested, and I was so not good at it. I hated the word trousers with all my heart. Because no matter how I tried, I couldn't spell it. And I despised the word father. One time, Grandma made me say it 50 times in a row. Sometimes she would say, okay, and sometimes she would say, not good. And I had no idea why, either way. It was only decades later that I realized it was because sometimes I said father, and sometimes I said father, and I could not hear the difference. So, tremendous suffering on my part, lots of frustration on her part, and negligible progress. My English would have remained completely non-functional if Grandma hadn't suddenly passed away in the spring of 1988. She was the one who took care of me in China. After she died, I joined my mother in Baton Rouge. With those 200 words in my arsenal, with those 200 English words in my arsenal, I started my American education. Actually, the schoolwork wasn't too bad, but my classmates were puzzling, to say the least. At one point, I seriously thought American teenagers were aliens. One day, I would learn that my opinion was actually shared by most American adults. And actually, a significant portion of other American teenagers. But future hindsight was little consolation when you were 13. I'd always been an avid reader when I was in China. I read all the books I could lay my hands on, whether they were Chinese classics or Western works translated into Chinese. In Chinese, I read such, famous books as Around the World in 80 Days and The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes. In Chinese, I read Rebecca and The Old Man and the Sea. In Chinese, I read the Bible from end to end. Basically, there was a severe shortage of books, and everything that came across my path got devoured indiscriminately. But now that I was in the United States and I had no social life, I needed books more than ever. I had to learn English so I could read English books. Remember how much I hated learning English? It did not improve just because now I was in an English-speaking country. If anything, it got worse. I couldn't even figure out what the kids at school meant by the word dating, and now I have to know the difference between inverse, converse, and obverse. But I kept at it because in general, I didn't enjoy being illiterate. And because everywhere I turned, I kept running into these Technicolor paperbacks with couples on them in poses that I'd never seen before in China. I figured the books were probably not outright pornography because they were right there in the middle of supermarkets. But let's just say I harbored hopes. I would pick one up from time to time and attempt to decipher the back blurb. I remember one book I put right down because it said it was about an infamous pirate. Now, infamous had to mean not famous, right? Why would I want to read about a pirate who wasn't even a pirate celebrity? Another back blurb quite excited me because it featured a governess. Now, I knew what a governor was, so a governess had to be a female governor. What an achievement for a woman in the Old West. So imagine my growing confusion as a young woman was picked up from the train station and dumped in some rancher's attic. It was the late 80s. Historical romance still dominated the genre. Within a year after my arrival, with my trusty dictionary by my side, I was devouring 600-page doorstoppers, sucked right in by the I love you, I hate you, I slap you, I kiss you dysfunction of it all. And of course, the passion, my God, the passion, which wasn't just a cherry on top. It was a cherry, the chocolate sauce, the nuts, the whipped cream, and maybe even the big old brownie underneath it all. Seriously, it's been 25 years since I read Sweet Savage Love, and I can still tell you that the good stuff starts on page 144. Sometimes I hear romance readers and writers protest that it isn't about sex. And I would always be the one standing sheepishly to the side, not saying anything, because I definitely was reading it for the sex too, among other things. And when I meet a bunch of romance writers or readers and we start reminiscing about what got us hooked in the first place, you know what we talk about. Everybody's personal page 144. This is what I love about the genre. Not only are the books themselves entertaining and nourishing, but the community as a whole. We can group squee on a pure adrenaline-driven level. We can discuss the same books against a backdrop of socioeconomic changes in the past century. And we can forge lifetime bonds because of our deep love and need for those books and for one another. But romance, especially the writing of it, means so much more to me personally. Until I was about 20, I followed the exact path you imagine for a young immigrant from a family that greatly valued education. Learning the difference between inverse, converse, and obverse, thanks to reading all these romances, paid off on the SAT. I went to college on a full scholarship, and in my senior year, I dutifully applied to grad schools that specialize in international relations. Not because I understood what international relations were about, but because I thought life at the embassy would revolve around cocktail parties. And I loved hors d'oeuvres and cocktail dresses. March of 1996, my mother took me and my grandfather out to dinner. In the middle of the meal, she pulled out a big envelope from her purse. It was from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and I'd been accepted. Mom told me it was the proudest moment of her life. 10 days later, plot twist. 10 days later, I found out I was pregnant. The next week, I attended the event at the Kennedy School that the Kennedy School held for their prospective new students. And I asked one of the directors, can I do this, given that I'm going to have a baby by the end of the year? She told me her own experience going to law school while being a new mom. She said, my marriage failed. I flunked out of law school. It's incredibly, incredibly challenging at this level, even without a newborn. Think carefully. When I returned from Boston, I told my mom that I wasn't going to Harvard, that I was going to get married, have a baby, and think about my own future a little later. It was, needless to say, an excruciating thing to tell the woman who has sacrificed so much to get me where I was. Years later, like 10, 15 years later, I would still come across in my house copies of the acceptance letter from Harvard copies that my mom had made and given me. And not one or two copies, but manila envelopes filled with dozens and dozens of them. I got married on my 21st birthday, graduated shortly after that, and moved to Austin, Texas, for my husband to start his new job. The sudden transition to being a full-time housewife actually agreed with me completely. In fact, the first few months of my marriage was quite idyllic. But then the baby came. And unfortunately, along with a beautiful little boy, came something I never prepared for, something I never even been aware of in my entire life: postpartum depression. Almost overnight, a despair that always simmered just below the surface took over. I couldn't explain why I felt as I did. I only knew that my life had turned into a long, dark tunnel of hopelessness. My husband and I both come from cultures where there weren't a whole lot of discussions on this kind of unwellness. Neither of us had encountered it in our personal lives, and we were in a new city all our own. He was loving, patient, and supportive. But we didn't know what we're dealing with, and untreated, this wasn't something that could be made to simply disappear, even with the best support. So I trudged on without any plans or even aspirations for my future, just trying to hold myself together and do right for the baby. Then one day, when my baby was 1.5, I took him to the library where I saw a new historical romance by an old favorite author. I took it home, settled my baby down to his nap, and cracked open the book, hoping for a little escape. It turned out to be the wrong book for me at the wrong time. Or perhaps I should say, it turned out to be exactly the right book for me at the exact right time. I know this will horrify some of you, but I set aside lots and lots of books unfinished. And when I don't finish a book, usually it's with a shrug and nothing else. But on that occasion, still in the grip of depression, I reacted very strongly to losing all my free time that day to a book that didn't give me any pleasure. I can't be sure what took place in my head during the hours between when I gave up on the book and when my husband got home that evening. But I remember very clearly telling him that I planned to take up writing historical romance. My reason being that if the book that so disappointed me could be a New York Times bestseller, then I should be able to make a few bucks while staying at home. Now, lots of you here today, probably the great majority, were born writers. You know what I mean. You started as soon as you could hold a pen. You filled countless notebooks when you were a kid. You wrote fan fiction before fan fiction had a name. I was never like that. Sure, I might have started 4 or 5 stories during my adolescence, but I always gave up after 5 pages, without either regret or any desire to improve. I didn't keep a journal. I never read books on writing. I never took creative writing classes. I didn't write, period. I didn't even think about writing. So this me, who couldn't even be called an amateur, went up to my husband and told him I planned to make money doing something I'd never done before, in a field that neither of us, nor anyone in our extended families, knew anything about. To his great credit, he never asked me, not that evening, nor in my 8-year-long apprenticeship that followed, whether I lost my mind. I think this happened in 1998. I can't tell you the month or the date or the day of the week. The most significant changes in our lives often happen without a mile marker, so that it's only when we look back that we can see the turning points. I also don't plan on telling you the identity of the author who wrote the most significant book in my life. But I can tell you this, I am so very grateful for her, and secretly think of her as my fairy godmother. In my youth, her books gave me a great deal of enjoyment. And when I grew up, her book gave me a career. What more can I ask of any author? Anyway, the day after I told my husband I planned to make money writing romance, I started working and researching with dollar signs in my eyes. After a while, much to my surprise, I realized that I've fallen in love with writing. It's almost like an arranged marriage trope in how it worked out, isn't it? I also realized one day, to my great relief, that I was no longer under the shadow of depression, that I was actually a cheerful, fairly well-adjusted person once again. Postpartum depression affects everyone differently, and it's possible that mine would have lifted on its own at some point, without me serendipitously discovering the thing I most wanted to do. But for me, my recovery will always have begun the day I started writing romance. Ever since then, there has never been a bad day of writing, even during those long stretches when all I produced was crap that ended in the discard files. Every day that I can sit down and write has been and will always be a blessing. My career as a romance writer, on the other hand, like everyone else's, has seen ups and downs. Do I sometimes look at the state of my career and go, I wish I could have achieved this level of success or that milestone recognition? Of course I do. But overall, I could never be the slightest bit unhappy with it. It has brought me so much satisfaction in terms of the work itself. It has led me to the best possible friends and colleagues. It has even given me some of the money that had motivated me to start in the first place. In other words, it has given me the American dream. But most of all, it gave me back myself. Romance doesn't owe me anything. It never did. I owe romance everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That was very inspiring. And I don't know about you guys, but I've read her books, and I'm glad she got pregnant. Don't forget, we've got the Hamilton Sing-Along later this afternoon and the Rita and Golden Heart Award ceremony tonight. Doors will open at 7:30, so you guys go out and have a great day. Thanks.